The rain was coming down in sheets the kind that turned roads into rivers and made even the most determined. Pedestrians reconsider their life choices. Not that I was out there suffering, no, I was inside, safe and warm. Staring at the questionable leftovers I had just rescued from the fridge, they smelled fine. Probably I gave them a cautious sniff, deciding I wasn't quite desperate enough to risk food poisoning tonight. The microwave hummed as I shut them inside, and I leaned against the counter, sighing. This was the peak of my Friday night, debating whether reheated takeout was worth potential gastrointestinal distress. Then the knock came, not a normal neighborly knock. It was urgent, erratic, 3 sharp, raps, a pause, then 2 more, like someone trying to communicate in Morse code. Except I was pretty sure "let me in or I die" wasn't a standard message. I hesitated. It was late, I wasn't expecting anyone, and let's be honest, I wasn't exactly the kind of guy who got surprised visitors. For a moment, I entertained the idea of pretending I wasn't home, but something, call it curiosity, call it stupidity, dragged me toward the door. I cracked it open just enough to see outside. A woman stood there, drenched from head to toe, her long coat clinging to her frame. She looked human at first glance, tall, striking, with dark eyes that glinted even in the dim porch light. But then I saw her ears, long, pointed, sweeping back in an elegant curve that definitely wasn't standard human anatomy. Her breath came fast and shallow, and she kept glancing over her shoulder. "Let me in," she said, and it wasn't a request. I blinked, stared briefly, considered closing the door. You what?" She exhaled, her shoulders tense. "I need a place to hide just for a little while." A few very important thoughts competed for attention in my brain. One, a strange woman showing up at my door in the middle of the night was already weird. 2, a strange alien woman showing up at my door in the middle of the night was concerning. 3, there was absolutely no scenario where letting her in ended in anything normal. Unfortunately, my mouth was already operating independently of my good sense. "Are you in trouble?" She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a grimace. That's an understatement. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard, and I could have sworn I saw a shadow moving just beyond my fence that settled it. My life might have been quiet, but I wasn't so detached from reality that I ignored the part where ominous figures lurking outside usually meant bad things. I stepped aside. "Okay, but if you kill me, I'd like the courtesy of a dramatic last word." She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. "Deal." She stepped inside, dripping water onto my floor, and I shut the door behind her, locking it for good measure. Now what? She took off her coat, revealing a dark, form-fitting suit underneath, the kind that looked both incredibly advanced and incredibly impractical for casual wear. A faint shimmer ran along the material when she moved, and for some reason my brain supplied the thought that is definitely not from any Earth department store. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "You've never seen a woman before?" "Oh, plenty." I cleared my throat. "Just not ones with accessories like yours." I gestured vaguely toward her ears. She sighed and ran a hand through her wet hair. "Look, I appreciate the hospitality, but we don't have much time." That was not a reassuring sentence. I crossed my arms. "Okay, then let's start with the basics. Who are you?" She hesitated. "Ian Wright." "And who exactly is chasing you?" The pause was longer this time. "That's complicated." "Complicated how?" Lion let out a slow breath. "Ever heard of political marriages?" He sure well I was supposed to be in one. I disagreed. I frowned, and instead of just saying no thanks and going on your way, I tried. That she cut in. "Turns out when your father is an ambassador and the groom-to-be as the son of a warlord, no thanks isn't an acceptable answer." I stared at her. "So you're telling me you ran away from an interstellar warrior clan, and now they're looking for you?" Lurin shrugged. "Pretty much." I rubbed my temples. "And you pick my house to hide in because randomness, unpredictability. Also, your neighborhood doesn't have security drones." "Oh, great." "So my lack of advanced security measures made me the perfect hideout for a fugitive alien bride." "Fantastic." Something thumped outside. Lion's posture snapped upright, her hand going to the strange-looking device strapped to her thigh. Didn't know much about alien technology, but I could take a solid guess that it was a weapon. She turned to me, voice low. Do you have a back exit? I swallowed. Technically, yes, but if we could not wreck my house while escaping, I'd appreciate it. The next knock at the door wasn't frantic like Lion had been. It was deliberate, measured. Lion, a voice called from the other side, male, calm, too calm. We know you're in there. I looked at her. She looked at me. I whispered, I really don't want to die tonight. She whispered back, then don't answer the door. Well, that was a start. The knocking didn't stop. It wasn't violent or aggressive, but it was steady, like the guy outside had all the time in the world. That was almost worse. It meant whoever was looking for Lion wasn't in a rush, because they already thought they'd won. Lion had gone completely still, her body tense, her long ears twitching slightly as she listened. I wasn't sure if they were more sensitive than human ears, but from the way she was holding herself, I guess she could hear more than I could. She turned her head just slightly toward me, her voice barely a whisper. Do you have weapons? I almost laughed. Lady, I own a frying pan, a can of bug spray, and a baseball bat, none of which seem useful in an intergalactic manhunt. She made a face like she was reconsidering her life choices. Great, just great. Another knock. Lion, the voice came again, calm and patient. You know why we're here. You know how this ends. I had no idea how this ended, but I was increasingly worried it involved me in some unpleasant way. I gestured toward the back of the house. There's a door that leads to the alley. She gave a small nod and started moving. I followed her because I was absolutely not sticking around to meet whatever was on the other side of my front door. We crept through the house, past my perfectly normal, perfectly boring kitchen and toward the back exit. Then something clicked, not in my head, in reality. Lion stopped just as I did was that I started. She cut me off. They've locked us, and I stared at her. How she gestured vaguely. Advanced technology signal, disruptors. It's not that hard to jam primitive locks. I took offense to that. Excuse me, I paid good money for that lock. Did it come with laser resistance? No, then it's not a very good lock. A faint hum filled the air, and the windows flickered just for a second, but enough for me to realize what had happened. They put up a containment field. Lion cursed under her breath something in a language I didn't recognize, but felt vaguely insulted by anyway. She was already moving, packing, looking for another exit. I, on the other hand, was still trying to process the fact that my house had been sealed like a high-security space prison. I threw up my hands. What exactly is the plan here? Because I feel like I was not consulted on the hostile alien takeover of my property situation. Lauren didn't answer. Immediately, her eyes darted around, scanning the room, and then she did something that made my stomach drop. She reached up and tapped a small device hidden behind her ear. I watched as a translucent blue interface flickered to life in front of her eyes, like futuristic augmented reality glasses. She swiped through it with quick practice movements, her fingers flickering through different screens. I couldn't see what exactly are you doing? I asked, because when someone starts messing with invisible alien technology inside your house, you kind of want to know. Why checking their frequency? She muttered, if I can disrupt the field, we can make a run for it. That sounded good, that sounded hopeful. And if you can't disrupt the field? She hesitated. I sighed. That's not encouraging. Hey, she said, not looking up from whatever sci-fi magic she was working on. You're the one who let me in. This is partially your fault. I pointed at myself. Oh, my fault. Was I the one who ran away from a marriage that could start an interstellar war? She shot me a flat look. Would you marry the son of a warmongering lunatic? Okay, fair. The knocking at the front door finally stopped, and I let out a slow breath of relief. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe a deep mechanical whir filled the air like something charging up. Lion went rigid. Move. I didn't question it. I threw myself to the ground just as something exploded. The door, my poor, innocent, perfectly normal door, was obliterated in a shower of sparks and metal. I groaned from my position on the floor. You're paying for that. Lion crouched beside me, eyes locked On the smoke-filed entryway, sure I'll leave you a check before we die, eh? Silhouette appeared in the wreckage of my door frame. A man stepped through tall and broad-shouldered clad in sleek black. Armor that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, his face was uncovered, and to my surprise, he looked well mostly human. Dark eyes, short, cropped hair, a face that might have been handsome if it weren't said in the distinct expression of someone very tired of chasing runaway brides. Lion, he greeted Relan, she replied. Deadpan, oh great, they knew each other. That was never a good sign you've called. Quite the mess, Rand said, stepping further inside. Lion snorted, that's the general. Idea, his eyes flicked to me, and I suddenly felt very aware of the fact that I was just a regular guy in sweatpants sitting on the floor of his wrecked house, while two aliens exchanged dramatic dialogue above me. You involved. A human, Rillan observed. I borrowed a human, Lurin corrected. Hey, I cut in, I am not an accessory in whatever space drama you two have going on. Really ignored me. Your father's offering a very generous deal. Surrender now, and we can avoid making this worse. Lion rolled her eyes. Oh wow, what a tempting offer. Be a political pawn for the rest of my life, or checks notes. Not do that really. Inside, like a man who had dealt with this conversation one too many times. Lion, you know this won't end well. She tilted her head. For me, or for you? I did not like the way she said that. Rand's gaze hardened. I didn't want to do this the hard way then, with alarming speed. Lion moved 1 second. She was beside me. The next, she was on Relan, twisting around him in a flurry of motion. I had no idea what was happening, but suddenly Ran was on the ground. Lurin was grabbing my wrist, and we were running. Wait, what? Where are we going? I wheezed as we sprinted through the house. Anywhere but here, she said, tapping at her device again. Hold on. I opened my mouth to demand why, but then the world blinked. A rush of cold air, a disorienting lurch. And suddenly we weren't in my house anymore. The first thing I noticed was the cold. The second thing I noticed was the fact that I wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. Instead, I was knee in something thick and wet, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought Lan had just teleported us into the middle of the ocean. My panicked, flailing Dissel, a clump of something slimy, and I realized with great displeasure that it wasn't water. It was mud, deep freezing suction, your shoes off mud. I looked around, blinking rapidly as my vision adjusted. We were in a forest. Sort of. The trees were too tall, too thin, their bark a strange metallic blue that shimmered under the dim light of what I assumed was a moon, except it was the wrong color. It cast a faint purple glow over everything, like the world had been permanently dipped in twilight. I took a slow breath, trying very hard to maintain my composure, and then turned to Lion. I have some questions. She barely spared me a glance, tapping furiously at the device behind her ear. Make them quick. Okay, first, where are we? She frowned at her. Anasa remote planet name doesn't translate well, but let's call it not where we just were. I looked around again. Uha, and you just happen to have the coordinates for not where we just were. Ready to go. Lion gave me a pointed look. I plan ahead. I cross my arms. Oh sure. Because nothing about tonight screams meticulous planning. She ignored that, which was rude because I felt like I had a very valid complaint. A distant sound rumbled through the trees, low and guttural, like something very large and very hungry had just noticed us. I tense. A Lion, she didn't look up. Yeah, is this a safe planet? The pause was not reassuring. Lana, it's less unsafe than where we were. Wow, love, that very comforting. She finally turned to me, looking mildly exasperated. Look, we didn't have a lot of options, okay? Ran had us locked down. If I hadn't jumped coordinates fast enough, we'd be in cuffs right now. I threw up my hands. I wouldn't be in cuffs. You would be in cuffs. I would just be a very unfortunate bystander. Another distant sound echoed through the forest, closer this time. It was followed by a faint rustling, like something moving through the undergrowth. Lurin immediately snapped to attention, her body tense. We need to move right away from the ominous noises. Fantastic idea. I tried to step forward, but the mud had other plans. My foot was thoroughly stuck, and when I yanked it free, it did so with a sound that could only be described as an embarrassing schlorp, Lauren pinched the bridge of her nose. Do you need help? No, I said with as much dignity as I could muster while flailing. I am an independent man, capable of walking through alien terrain. Lauren raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She just started moving her boots, making barely a sound, as she navigated the terrain like it was second nature. I meanwhile was making enough noise to alert every creature in a 5 m radius. We walked, or in my case, stumbled for several minutes, the forest growing denser around us. The air smelled different here, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, like rain-soaked metal and something faintly floral. The purple glow from the sky filtered through the trees, casting strange, shifting shadows. Eventually, we reached drier ground, and I collapsed against a tree with a dramatic groan. Okay, can we take a second to appreciate the fact that my night started with leftover takeout, and is now this lion glanced at me, not handling the adventure well. I think I'm handling it fantastically, considering I was just kidnapped via teleportation. Lion snorted. I didn't kidnap you, you just came along. Oh, let's pretend I had any say in the matter. She smirked, but didn't argue. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Okay, South. What's the plan? She hesitated. Oh, that was not a good sign. You do have a plan, right? I pressed. Lion tapped at her interface again. Well, my ship was supposed to be nearby. I sat up straighter. Supposed to be, she grimaced. Look, when you're making an emergency escape, sometimes the math gets a little imprecise. I stared at her. Are you telling me we might be stranded only temporarily? She said quickly. I just need to recalibrate the coordinates. And a sharp click echoed by behind us. We both froze slowly. We turned toward the sound. A creature stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the undergrowth. It was tall, easily 7 feet, but thin, with elongated limbs and skin that glistened under the purple light like polished stone. It had no visible eyes, just a smooth, featureless face. It tilted its head. I grabbed Lan's arm. So, fun question. Friend or foe? Lauren didn't answer immediately. She was watching the creature closely, her fingers twitching toward the weapon on her thigh. The creature took a step forward, moving with eerie fluidity. I took a step back. I vote we leave. Lion didn't argue. She grabbed my wrist, and suddenly we were running again. Branches snapped around us as we bolted through the trees, the distant sound of pursuit growing louder. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to know how fast that thing could move. Then ahead of us, something shimmered in the air. Lion's eyes lit up. There, that's my ship. I squinted. That's nothing. She yanked me forward, and suddenly the air rippled, and just like that, we were standing in front of a sleek silver spacecraft. It had been cloaked, nearly invisible against the surroundings, but now the door was sliding open. I did not ask for permission. I dived inside. Lauren followed, slamming the controls, and the door sealed shut just as a loud thud hit the exterior. Panning, I collapsed onto the floor of the ship. You know what? I take it back. My night didn't start with leftover takeout. Started with a bad decision. Len was already at the controls, powering up the ship. She smirked. Well, bad decisions make for interesting stories. The engines roared to life, the ship vibrating beneath us as it lifted off. I let out of breath, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, well, I think I prefer boring somehow. I didn't think I'd be getting boring again anytime soon. The hum of the ship's engines was oddly comforting, considering I had just been chased through an alien forest by a faceless 7-foot-tall horror. I was still sprawled on the floor, trying to remember how to breathe like a normal person, while Lion efficiently flicked through the ship's controls like she wasn't also completely soaked in mud. I lifted a hand weakly. So what the hell was that? Lauren, without looking up, replied in a Larry hunting drone. That was a drone. I sat up so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. A drone is supposed to be a tiny little flying thing that delivers packages. That thing looked like it could rip my spine out for fun. Lion smirked. Larry, technology is thorough. I groaned and let my head thump back against the cool metal floor. I hate space. Lion chuckled. Yauk, get used to it. I opened my mouth to argue, but then my brain caught up with what she just said. I sat up again, narrowing my eyes at her. Excuse me, get used to it implies I'll be staying in space. Lion finally looked at me, propping an elbow on the control panel. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't plan on going back to your planet anytime soon. And seeing a Scylla knows your face now. I'd say it's not exactly safe for you to return. I blinked at her. Are you saying I'm stuck with you? She shrugged, unless you want to go back and explain to an intergalactic bounty hunter, while you accidentally became an accomplice too? Treason, I groaned again, dropping my face into my hands. I am so not built for this. Lion grinned, clearly enjoying my suffering. You're adapting well enough. That's just adrenaline. Any second now, I'm going to pass out. And hope this was all a very weird fever dream. Lion turned back to the ship's controls, tapping a few buttons before the ship gave a soft lurch and entered what I could only describe as warp speed. The view outside the window shifted from a starry night to a swirling tunnel of light, and my stomach did an uncomfortable flip. I swallowed hard. Okay, no one told me space travel felt like riding a roller coaster, made of existential dread. You get used to that too, Lion said casually. I shot her a glare, but before I could complain, further a loud beep sounded from the console. Lion frowned, leaning in to examine the screen. I squinted at it, but it was all in a language I couldn't read. What now? She exhaled sharply. We being tracked? I threw my hands in the air. Of course we are, because why wouldn't we be? Lurin ignored my outburst and instead started frantically working the controls. They must have planted a tracker on me before we escaped. Ran is annoyingly good. At that, I slumped back against the seat. Great. So what do we do? Eject me into space as a distraction? Lion gave me an amused glance. Tempting, but no, we need to get rid of the tracker before they catch up. I frowned. And how exactly do we do that? She tapped a few more buttons and suddenly a holographic projection of the ship appeared in the air between us. A blinking red dot glowed ominously near the back of the vessel. There it is. Lurin stood, already moving toward the rear of the ship. I hesitated. And what if it's inside the ship? She paused. Then we might have a problem. I groaned. You're great at reassurance. You know that we made our way to the back of the ship, where a small maintenance hatch was built into the floor. Lion knelt beside it, prying it open to reveal a mess of wires, panels, and what I assumed was spaceship guts. I peered over her shoulder. Any chance the tracker is just like sitting right on top? Super easy to grab. She shot me a look. Do things ever work that way? I sighed. No, they do not. She pulled a small device from her belt, a sleek scanner that beeped softly as she waved it over the open panel. After a moment, the beeping intensified, and Land's expression darkened. It's embedded, she muttered. I frowned. Meaning, we're going to have to cut it out of the ship. I took a step back. Nope, absolutely not. I do not trust you to perform spaceship surgery while we are actively flying. She rolled her eyes. Would you rather we let really and catch up? I grinned. Fine, but if this thing explodes, I will haunt you. Lion grinned. Duly noted. She pulled out a small, sleek tool that looked suspiciously like a futuristic welding torch. With practiced precision, she began slicing into the ship's panel carefully, extracting the small blinking tracker embedded inside. The moment she pry it free, the ship gave a soft jolt. I flailed. Why did the ship jolt? Lion was already on her feet. Because they know we found it, and now they're speeding up. I ran after her as she sprinted back to the cockpit, where the blinking red warning light on the screen was flashing even brighter than before. I swallowed hard. Tell me we have an escape plan. Lion tapped furiously at the controls. We do? Is it a good plan? She hesitated. I threw my hands up. Oh, come on, they won't expect us to turn around, she said suddenly, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. I froze. I'm sorry. What? Instead of answering, she yanked the controls hard. The ship spun. I screamed, not even a dignified scream, a full-in cartoon character. I am about to die. Scream. The ship looped in a dizzying arc, reversing course at a breakneck speed. I clutched the seat, heart hammering. This is a terrible plan. Elle was grinning. It's a brilliant plan. I squeezed my eyes shut. Please tell me you at least know where we're going. Oh, absolutely. I cracked one eye open. You hesitated again. Lurin just smirked, flicking a switch hold on the ship. Shot forward. The stars around us blurring into streaks of light As we entered another jump, I collapsed into the seat head spinning Lion glanced at. Me clearly enjoying my misery, still wish for boring I groaned, covering my face. With my hands so much, she just laughed the sound light and unbothered as if she hadn't just yeet us into hyperspace with no clear destination. I had a terrible sinking, feeling that this was only the beginning. The ship jolted again, because of course it did at this point. I was convinced Lion had built the controls out of malfunctioning shopping carts, and pure spite, I braced myself against the nearest console, gritting my teeth, as the world momentarily tilted sideways. We are definitely going to die, I muttered. Lion, in contrast, looked infuriatingly pleased with herself as she piloted the ship through a gravitational slingshot maneuver. I did not understand and did not want to. We are not going to die. I just need to shake their signal. I narrowed my eyes at her. Your plan was to turn around and throw ourselves directly at the bounty hunters. You'll forgive me if I have trust issues, she grinned, punching a few buttons. I'm improvising. Oh, fantastic, my favorite phrase to hear during a high-speed pursuit through space. I forced myself to look at the main viewport. The swirling stars outside had started to settle, revealing something I was definitely not prepared for. A massive asteroid belt stretched out before us, its jagged rocks tumbling in slow, menacing spirals. I swallowed a lurin. She was already adjusting the thrusters. Hold on, I hate when you say that. The ship shot forward right into the belt. A particularly large asteroid whizzed past, missing us by what I considered to be very uncomfortably close margins. I clutched the edge of my seat. Okay, great, so instead of getting caught by Relan, we're just going to be pancaked by interstellar rocks. Solid plan. Lion flashed a grin. I'm counting on the debris to scramble their sensors. They'll have to slow down. I peeked at the rear display. The bounty hunter ships were still in pursuit, but I could see what she meant while we darted between the massive chunks of floating stone. They were forced to maneuver more carefully, losing valuable seconds. Seconds that apparently Lion planned to use. She jerked the ship sharply left. Diving between two spinning boulders, I was nearly thrown sideways. Do you have a pilot's license? Technically, she said, bank-ing sharply to avoid a smaller chunk of debris. That is not a comforting answer. She spun the controls again, sending us twisting into a narrow passage between two massive asteroids that had apparently decided to cozy up next to each other like old friends. I squeezed my eyes shut. I regret every decision that led me here. The ship gave a final shudder as we cleared the worst of the field. I dared to open one eye. Lurin smirked. See no explosions. I heat a breath, pressing a hand to my chest. That was without question the single most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Lion hummed, tapping at the controls. Then, you're going to love the next part, I groaned. There's a next part. The ship sensors beeped. I followed her gaze to the screen, where a small, seemingly insignificant blip pulsed softly. What is that? I asked, trying to sound calm. A refueling station, she answered. I frowned. So why does it sound like you just said refueling station with the same tone of voice as someone about to commit a felony? Lion smirked. Because I might be slightly unwelcome there. I buried my face in my hands. Of course, you are the ship angled toward the station, a floating structure that looked like it had been cobbled together from old starships in sheer determination. Lights flickered along its edges, and dozens of small crafts were docked along its seed, giving it the appearance of a heavily overcrowded space garage. Lurin guided us toward a docking bay, her hands steady on the controls as the ship touched down with a metallic clunk. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I was holding. She stood stretching. All right, you stay here. I blinked. Excuse me. She gave me a look. You have no idea how to navigate a space station full of smugglers and black market traders. I do. I frown. And you have no idea how to navigate a grocery store, so I'd say we're even. She rolled her eyes. Stay here. I crossed my arms. Not a chance. You dragged me into this mess. I'm not letting you leave me alone in a ship that is apparently a hot commodity among intergalactic bounty hunters. Lurin sighed, but I could see the corner of her mouth twitch. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. We stepped off the ship into The station's docking bay, and the smell hit me first. It was a weird combination of engine grease burning ozone and something that smelled suspiciously like deep-fried tentacle. I wrinkled my nose. This place reeks. Lurin took it in stride, walking ahead like she belonged there. Better than smelling like plasma burns. I wasn't sure I agreed as we moved through the station's halls. I did my best not to make eye contact with any of the very sketchy-looking aliens that were. Loitering around there were beings of all shapes, and Sis-E's, some with extra limbs, some with glowing eyes, and at least one guy who appeared to be made entirely out of translucent jelly lion led us to a small, dimly lit repair bay, where a grizzled mechanic with a mechanical arm was tinkering with a busted thruster. He glanced up, and the second he saw Lion, his expression soured. "Oh, you Lion," grinned Omida. Mechanic exhaled through his nose. "What do you want, Lion?" She leaned against the counter. "Fuel, maybe. Some upgrades," he eyed.